Hello and welcome to a special presentation with Washington artist Jack Boul, who happens to be my father. Dad's often called the Dean of Washington printmakers, and today he's going to give us a demonstration on how to make a monotype. We're also going to have a conversation with a curator at the National Gallery of Art, and we're going to be showcasing some of Dad's beautiful paintings and prints. Jack Boul taught at American University for many years. He's now 93 and still paints every day. His work is included in the National Gallery of Art, it's in the Phillips Collection, the San Francisco Museum of Fine Arts, and many other galleries and private collection. So let's go ahead and get going, and we'll meet Dad inside his studio. So Dad, we're here in your studio here in Bethesda, where you've lived for 30 years. Before that you had a studio in Tacoma Park. And I wanted to ask you about your subjects for monotypes. What are some of your favorite subjects?
Well, I like clouds. I like landscapes. Very often it's the landscape and how the clouds or the sky rests on it. Either the landscape is so large it occupies everything, or it's just a half of a picture or a third of a picture. So there's a relationship between the sky, the clouds, and the ground. Well, I like cows, particularly black and white cows.
Holstein cows, right?
Yes, that's correct.
The black and white dairy cows.
Right. I'm interested in how they're marked, but I'm also interested in how they're constructed. I used to take many photographs of cows when I come out in the country. When you see them in the field, and there's a group of them, they make a beautiful abstract pattern. And it's just beautiful to see the shapes that they make.
So this was from a catalog from one of your shows at American University several years ago, but it was an interview you did, and you talked about Corot. So read us a little bit about this.
Right. Camille Corot once said, "I'm never in a hurry to get into details. I am first and foremost interested in the large shapes and the general movement of things. That's what happens when I look at something. If I look at it, it's almost as if I'm squinting. And if you squint, you don't see any details. All you see is the large, simple shapes."
Okay, that's interesting.
Right.
So I want to ask you something about a particular monotype. When you're talking about squinting and seeing shapes, so we have this monotype here. So talk to us a little bit about this monotype.
Well, they were made of my experience in Italy. There's just something very lovely about the shapes of the buildings with their windows and the trees. I'm interested in the shapes and how they relate to each other. And very often, in order to find the shapes, you have to eliminate all the little details which get in the way of the shape, really. When I looked at the actual scene, I instinctively was shutting out the details by squinting. So what you're getting is just the large shapes without very little detail, really.
Okay, Dad, so I found this monotype you did of cows, and I know you're fond of it. Cows feeding is what you called it. And why are you pleased with this one?
Well, there's something for me, very exciting about the black and white shapes. The shapes themselves are just beautiful. They become cows only after you look at them and try to find out what they are. But even before they became cows, they were beautiful shapes.
That's interesting. So it doesn't matter that they're cows. It's just the shapes that interest you on this.
Yes.
Now this is one of my personal favorites. It's birds on a wire. And it's just a very simple concept, but it's birds on a telephone wire. And what can you tell us about this? What interested you about it? Or
Well, I just see them as a collection of interesting shapes, and particularly the spaces between them are interesting. birds themselves, even in a real city, they're facing or turning. There's just a variety of shapes. Negative space is the space between objects, and very often one neglects that by just dealing with the objects, but the spaces between them are terribly important, both in explaining what the objects are, but themselves are just fascinating to look at. So I find myself looking more often at the negative spaces first and then the objects.
So, Dad, I know that one of your favorite all-time topics is something we call cows in the gully. And you've done this monoprint several times. You've done the painting several times. I believe this was in Mary Carswell's collection. Talk to us about this particular painting, because I think you really like this topic.
Well, I'm as much interested in the shapes of the trees as the cows that are dirty. And I could look at them indefinitely. Everything about it, I'm particularly interested in edges. And if you look at this, you notice some of the edges are absolutely even, some of them are uneven, some of them run into the next thing. It's just a whole series of wonderful relationships between positive things, negative things, and edges.
Dad, our whole house is filled with your art. I remember you told me once how you decide the difference between a decoration and a painting, or a decoration and a monotype, and that some things are just like a decoration on the wall. And I'm wondering, when somebody decides, what do I want to hang on my wall, how do you decide, I like this one and I don't like that one? What comes to mind for you?
Again, it's the relationship of the shapes, the negative space, the edges. There's something about what the monotypes represent or what they look like. It's a question of how much variety is there in terms of shapes, in terms of colors, in terms of black, white, and grays, which in a way are limited, but they're also very, very wonderful. You can get many grays in monotypes. Something can be done that looks very simple, and yet you could look at it again and again and again, because each time you look at it, you're really seeing a different relationship, even though nothing has changed.
Dad's been making monotypes for many decades. We asked him to make a demonstration for you, and that's what he's going to do right now with a little commentary from Eric Denker from the National Gallery. Dad uses a special antique press, but you don't need to do that, don't worry. Take a look.
Hello, I'm Dr. Eric Denker with the National Gallery of Art as Senior Lecturer and also the curator of the Corcoran's print and drawing collection from 1998 to 2006. I've known Jack Boul's monotypes since the 1980s. I first saw them reproduced in a Washington Post article by Paul Richard, and I immediately was attracted to them and engaged with not only their subject matter, but the very evocative way in which they were done. Jack Boul's monotypes are perhaps the latest in a long line of monotypes that stretches all the way back to the 17th century. Monotype as a process is the single most painterly form of printmaking. As the name implies, monotype, you can only make one that has the integrity of the original design. The artist begins with a flat surface and applies ink to that surface and then creates an image by removing ink where he wants the paper to show through to become the areas of white. When an artist goes to do a monotype, he can paint directly with a viscous ink onto the surface of a metal plate. Sometimes today people use plexi, but normally it's still done on metal. monotype experienced a great revival in the 19th century. Degas made a lot of monotypes. Auguste Lepic taught not only Degas, but Bracquemond and Pissarro and others. And so it became very important because it is a very evocative technique. It suggests, and it is very atmospheric. These are things the Impressionists were interested in, and they continue to be relevant today. He's influenced 3, perhaps 4 generations of Washington artists, both through his teaching at the studio school and at American University, and through private lessons as well. You can see the influence of Jack's work on lots of different artists in the Washington area. When the artist is content with that design, it is put on a press and it is printed in the same way an etching or an engraving would be printed. It goes through the press. A heavy roller forces the paper down onto the ink-laden surface. And when it comes through the other side of the press, you have a mirror image of the design. It's a very easy technique to do. It's a very hard technique to do well.
I'm Tom O'Brien, Jack's son-in-law, and one of his biggest fans for over 30 years. So you've seen Jack do a monotype, but he also makes beautiful paintings, and you'll recognize many of the same themes, but executed in a very different way. He uses many of the same subjects, but the paintings evoke a warmness and a geometry, a relationship of shapes to the page that are very pleasing to the eye. Paul Richards, the longtime art critic at the Washington Post, wrote a review of Jack's work, and he captured many of the qualities that are evocative of Jack's paintings. Richards wrote, in part, and I quote, "Many of Boul's monotypes are little memory-retrieving objects, no larger than a postcard. Boul produces them on an old-fashioned screw-down proof press, which means that he works small. He also works swift. His hand is quick. You know that from the darting movements of his brush. And he is also quick in seeing. Boul is excellent in benign glimpses. His subjects are as unthreatening as a stroll in the country or a visit to the Phillips. He sees an empty wheelbarrow bright in the backyard, glowing in the sunshine of the summer afternoon. His monotype techniques evoke Edgar Degas. The modernists of Paris like to walk through neighborhoods and record the quotidien. Boul sees a bald man in a barber shop getting a haircut. And through a flurry of his dispersed markings, so do we. He sees a couple dining in a Baltimore restaurant, like Hauser's, or his wife reading the newspaper in the living room. Or cows, nice bucolic cows. The man makes pleasant pictures.
One of the most important monotype series that my father did was a series on the Holocaust, which was first shown at the Corcoran Museum here in Washington in the year 2000. We've since donated it to the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. And we made a video that I want to share with you now that kind of talks about the history of that and why it was so important to Dad.
was 19 years old in 1945 and was drafted and sent overseas, wound up in Italy at a prisoner of war camp 339 located outside of Pisa. I spoke and understood Yiddish, and I guess they thought that would be helpful in a German prisoner of war camp, and so I was attached to an engineer battalion that was supervising the motor pool in that particular prisoner of war camp. It was a large camp with just German prisoners of war. In the beginning, the SS troopers were sent home first because they were more of a problem than the regular German soldiers who stayed on for quite a while and did various tasks. At about this time, the concentration camps in Europe were liberated, and there were a number of pictures available. I was able to get a hold of a couple which showed just hundreds and hundreds of dead bodies piled up, as well as individual people who looked so starved they were really skeletons. I thought I'd show these to the prisoners I was working with and get their reaction, but almost every one of them denied that they were real. They said, "You have your propaganda and we have our propaganda." And so I never really had a sense that they accepted these photos that I was looking at. Many years later, I was living in Washington, D.C. and teaching art at American University. At that time, I saw a great movie called Showa. It was an unbelievably moving movie which showed you the cattle cars that people were transported in. It showed you the concentration camps. It showed you the where the people were burnt, actually, the moratoriums. It also showed you where the ashes were buried, but there was an absence of people. I don't remember seeing people, either dead or alive, and I remember the photographs in the army of people, of dead people as well as semi-dead people. And so I decided to see if I couldn't find those photos. And I went to the archives in Washington, and they had a huge collection of photos dealing with things that were done at different concentration camps. I was surprised to find that there were many more concentration camps than I realized. I always thought there were just one or two big ones. I stayed at the archives for 2 days, drawing and looking at these photos. I then went back to my studio and made the monotypes that I made. I made these because I really wanted to do something to keep these images alive. I thought it was important that they not be forgotten.
Jack Boul's Holocaust series, compelling, powerful set of work that talks to us about the horrors of the Holocaust during the Second World War. These were moments that show man's inhumanity to man, and Jack had to compellingly deal and engage with these important issues. We know that he did it by way of having experienced film, having experienced photographs, having talked to prisoners of war. We know that this had a profound effect on him, and that he reacted to this by engaging the subject on a very visceral level. Arms and legs and skulls and body parts. And yet, it's more than simply about the Holocaust as a pictorial record. It transcends that in the way that great art always transcends the immediacy of its subject. As with Callot, as with Goya in his Disasters of War, it's an anti-war tract of great power, giving us that idea that man's cruelty to man is something that's always possible. There's always some potential for this. We need to remain sensitive and aware and not forget that this happened not so very long ago, and that we're reminded of it by the power of Jack's ability to organize his thoughts visually and to present them in this series to us.
Well, as I said at the beginning, my dad's still painting every day at 93. He's coming up on 94 real soon, and we're so pleased to see his new work every day that comes out of the studio in Bethesda. If you have a question, go to my dad's website and just type a message and give us a phone number or an email how to contact you. We'll get back to you. It's www.jackboul.com. My dad's also on Instagram, Jack Boul Artist, if you want to take a look at some of his recent work. We want to thank the folks at VisArts, especially Lisa Gallen and her sister Karen, and Jared, our cameraman and editor, who's done a wonderful job. For more information on VisArts, go to www.visartscenter.org. Thank you all for joining us.